Hello, Professor. Sorry about my quarantine here. Um, I'm going to go ahead and read out the chapters that you told us to do for our unit recap. Chapter 13, What is Bureaucracy? Also, I don't have a piece of paper. I ran out of ink, so I'm using my other let me see if I can flip it, resource to read my work that I've done. Anyway, let's get to it. What is bureaucracy? It is an organization that is structured hierarchically to carry out specific functions, generally characterized by an organizational chart. Each class of jobs have different expertise. Bureaucracy is not only limited to government, but can be used in different settings such as universities or corporations. Handling complex problems needs a division of labor. Public or government bureaucracies differ from private. In private industry, you tend to have only one head leader running the day-to-day operations of the business. But the title of these individuals is usually called a CEO, Chief Executive Officer. Public bureaucracies have more than one leader. Take the president. Although he is our head of the country, he still has certain officers in different departments running it, like funding and staffing. Public bureaucracies are public bureaucracies are to serve all citizens, while private bureaucracies have self-interests. Main difference between both are that private industries tend to make a profit, while public bureaucracies serve a purpose for the people to efficiently as serve for the people to efficiently as efficiently as possible to conserve taxpayer dollar. There are different models of bureaucracy that they are as follows: Weberian model, not Weber, Weber. Weberian model. This is the classic model where it ran hierarchically, in which decisions are based off logic. This was proposed by German sociologist Max Weber. This view tends to flow from the top downwards. Bureaucrats use logic and research to solve issues instead of using one's gut feeling. Acquisitive model. This is a model that bureaucrats are seeking to expand the size of their budgets and staffs to gain power. Although the bureaucrats are not bureaucracy is a non-profit organization. The bureaucrats who want to maximize the budgets and staff show a tendency to trapping power in the public sector. These bureaucrats tend to want to sell their products such as national defense, public housing, and agricultural subsidies to both Congress and the public. A monopolistic model is the model that illustrates this model illustrates that since the bureaucracies do not have a competitive firm against it, lack of competition leads to inefficient and costly operations, in which I feel the United States government kind of runs both acquisitive and monopolistic at the moment. In 1979, the new government was tiny compared to what it is now. At the time there were three departments: the state, which only had 9 employees, war, which had 2 employees, and treasury with 39 employees, and the office of attorney general, which is now called the Department of Justice. Time have changed as the country expanded from east to west. So did government. To give as an example, our military now have 1.4 million serving, not including other departments such as the postal workers, workers of legislative and judicial branch. We have 2.7 million employees serving this nation. That's a lot of people. Ronald Reagan had a large impact on staffing and funding. Employment fell. This Employment fell. This was due to a large part of the government sharing, a program in which money was transferred from state to local governments. While government employment picked up later in his administration, it never had came to the same impact it had during the 60s and 70s. The Great Recession also had a large role to play. In 2009, the number of state and local government workers started to fall due to the inability to collect funds and a revenue like the previous levels of activity. From August 2008 to the start of 2013, the government lost about 730,000 employees. Jesus. In 1929, spending by all levels of the government was equivalent to only about 11% of the nation's gross domestic product, or GDP for short. For the fiscal year of 2019, it was about 36%. Studies show that Americans have still knowledge to how the federal budget is spent. Little knowledge, actually have little knowledge. Because of the additional programs, the government spends so much more money on the poor than we realize. Many are aimed at low-income families, pushing the total amount spending close to 60%. With the federal bureaucracy are different agencies and organizations within the federal bureaucracy. The executive branch, which employs most of its government staff, has four major types of structures. They are the cabinet departments, independent executive agencies, independent regulator agencies, and government corporations. Each department has a distinctive role for the president, and some have unusual internal structures, overall goals, and grants of power. The 15 cabinet departments are the major service organizations of the federal government. They can also be called the line organizations because they have direct links to the president. They are directly accountable to the president and are responsible for performing government functions such as money printing and training troops. The department formed by Congress when it was most needed. The first department to ever be created was State, and for our most recent department, Homeland Security, which started in 2003. The president can only suggest creating, replace, or abolish any agency, but must be approved by Congress. Each department is headed by a secretary, but the Department of Justice is the only one that is headed by the Attorney General. Each department also ran by under secretaries, assistant secretaries, and other personnel. The president has the power to appoint or fire all top officials. Sometimes the cabinet does not respond to the president's wishes. A reason why presidents are frequently upset with their staff is because below the top are held by permanent employees, as of many are committed to established programs and are reluctant to change. Independent executive agencies are bureaucratic agencies that are not located within a department, but report directly to the president, who appoints the chief officials. Independent regulatory agencies are responsible for specific types of public policies. Its function is to make and implement rules and regulations to protect public interests. The earliest known agency we know as the Interstate Commerce Commission, which was established in 1887, when Americans started to seek some form of control over the rapidly growing business and industrial sector. This new form was supposed to make technical, non-political decisions about rates, profits, and rules which would benefit all and did not need to go through congressional legislation. In practice, agencies are administered independently from all three governmental branches. It was created because Congress did not know the ins and outs of the subject at hand to carry out specific laws. Regulatory agencies combine some or all of the three branches that they provide enforcement of these rules. They are judicial in that they decide disputes involving the rules they have made. During the presidency of Jimmy Carter from 1977 to 1981, the significant deregulation was initiated. For example, Carter appointed a chairperson of the Civil Aeronautics Board, who gradually eliminated regulation of airline fares and routes for our most recent under airplanes and routes, and for our most recent under Bill Clinton's administration, which is from 1993 to 2001, the Interstate Commerce Commission was eliminated. After the financial crisis in 2008, many people saw poor regulation in financial industry as the major cause of the nation's economic difficulties. So under Obama's administration, he regulated the industry. After intense debates, Congress finally passed a regulation plan in 2010. Another form of bureaucratic organization is government corporation, used when government activity is primarily commercial. This agency administers a quasi-business enterprise. The corporation has a board of directors and managers, but it usually does not have stockholders. The federal government can also take control of private corporations to different circumstances. One such form is bankruptcy. When a company files for bankruptcy, it is asking the federal judge to give a break from its creditors. When doing so, the judge takes over and gives responsibility to the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or the FDIC, which ensures continuity of service to bank customers. The federal government can also obtain or complete ownership of a private corporation by purchasing its stock. Before 2008, such takeovers were rare, although occasionally happened. Like the Continental Illinois was the nation's seventh largest bank, failed in 1984. The FDIC wound up in control for 10 years before it could find another buyer. This rescue provided a blueprint for the massive bank bailout initiated by George W. Bush in October 2008. The bailout program was very unpopular. Still in time, the government recovered its investments and made a small profit. By staffing the bureaucracy, you have two types. The first one being politically appointed by the president, which is done through a method called the Plum Book, which the president has his advisors solicit suggestions from politicians, business persons, and prominent individuals, and civil servants who make up the permanent executive branch workforce. These civil servants are hard to fire and are usually fired because of incompetence. There has been a history for firing appointed officials due to the mistrust between the official and the president of the time. The spoils system and application of the principle to the victor belongs to spoils became the standard method of federal positions. Andrew Jackson's spoils system survived for many years, but it became increasingly corrupt, so later adopted the merit system, an idea used by Germans which was based on competitive examination. In 1883, the Pendleton Act, or the Civil Service Reform Act, was passed, placing the first limits on the spoils system. The act provided the federal government jobs be awarded based on merit and that the government employees be selected through competitive exams. The act that also made it unlawful to fire or demote for politicians' reasons employees who were covered by the law, thus creating the Civil Service Commission, which is a civil service commission is a government agency that is constituted by the legislature and regulate the employment and working conditions of civil servants, oversee hiring and promotions, and promote the value of the public service. Its role is roughly, I can't pronounce that word, I even wrote it down, analogous to that of the Human Resources Department in corporations. The Civil Service Reform Act of 1978 is intended to provide federal managers with the flexibility to improve government operations and productivity while, at the same time, protect employees from unfair or unwarranted practices. In 1796, Congress enacted the Government in the Sunshine Act, which told that for the first time that all multi-headed federal agencies hold their meetings in public sessions. Another approach of bureaucratic reform in privatization. For example, some prisons are run by the private sector as well as schools. America has also adopted the use of e-government, which is a form of communication the government can use to communicate effectively to the public as well as other agencies via email or .gov applications. Whistleblower is when someone brings to the public attention of the misdeeds the government is doing to the people. There are laws in place for protecting whistleblowers, which was first established in 1978, and has been added with further protection in 1989. When Congress passed the Whistleblowers Protection Act, despite the protection, there has been little to no evidence that the whistleblowers have been protected. Because Congress, to see the day-to-day activities of its programs, it must delegate a certain role to the agencies. Congress delegates power to agencies through enabling legislation. Bureaucrats have been known to be policymakers as well, although the main classification is to uphold the law that the government makes. This is known as the Iron Triangle, which means it is a three-way alliance among legislatures, bureaucrats, and interest groups to make or preserve policies that benefit their respective interests. With the growth of the complexity of the government, policy making has also been more complex. Bureaucrats is larger. Congress has more committees and subcommittees, and interest groups are more powerful. Many scholars now use the term issue network, which consists of a group of individuals or agencies that support a policy position on a given issue. Chapter 14. The common law is the body of law, or the courts. Chapter 14, the courts. The common law is the body of law developed from judicial decisions in English and U.S. courts, not attributable to the legislature. Stare decisis is a stand on decided cases. The judicial policy by following the precedents made by the past decisions. The sources of American law are from the Constitution, case laws, and statutes and administrative regulations. The federal court system practice using jurisdiction, which is the authority of a court to decide certain cases. Not all courts can decide all cases, where a case arises and its subject matter in two different jurisdictional issues. Because the Constitution made the government to have limited powers, federal jurisdiction is also limited by Article 3, Section 1 in the U.S. Constitution. If a federal question arises, which is a question that has to do with the U.S. Constitution, acts of Congress, or treaties, a federal question provides the basis for federal jurisdiction. A diversity of citizenship is when a condition that when the parties to the lawsuit are citizens of different states, or when it is citizen of the U.S. versus a foreign citizen. Diversity of citizenship can provide a basis for federal jurisdiction. In standing to sue, meaning is a matter to justify bringing suit. For the parties to the lawsuit, amicus curiae brief is the legal argument filed by the third party. They cannot be directly involved in the litigation, but has an interest in the outcome of the case. Sometimes interest groups of the other plaintiffs will bring a class action lawsuit, which is an individual seeking damages for all persons similarly situated, like I did back in my previous employer for nearly breaking my back. There are 3 levels of federal courts. They are as follows: the U.S. District Courts, which include trial court, appellate court, and general and limited jurisdiction, in which a case is heard without significant restriction, tax court or bankruptcy court. 2, U.S. Court of Appeals and the Final Appeals Court. And then three, the Supreme Court of the United States, or SCOTUS, as they call it for short. The United States also has a federal court that deals with the war on terrorism, the FISA Court, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. The court was established in the 70s to spy on foreign countries for the sake of protecting the country. It had a major shift since 9/11, in which it agreed to see bulk of collection and large scales of information. How do cases reach the Supreme Court? Well, there are factors that bear the decision. There are 2 ways where the cases reach the Supreme Court. Writ of certiorari, which is an order issued to the higher Supreme Court from the lower Supreme Court to send up to case for review. And the rule of 4. 4 justices must vote to grant a petition for review if a case is to come before the full court. How does it work? The court procedures have no evidence heard in a Supreme Court case. They use abstracts, records, and briefs. They are arguing from the previous decisions where from the lower courts if they coincide with the law or not. That is when the oral arguments take place. When it is just an attorney presenting the case. With the process come with certain outcomes. The types of opinions are affirm. A decision is deemed valid. Reverse, to annul or make void. Or remand is to send the case back to the court it was originally heard from. Those decisions are from an opinion. The opinion is as follows. You have unanimous, all judges agree, majority, where most judges agree, concurring opinion, an opinion filed by a judge that agrees with the majority or plurality opinion on the case, but that bases this conclusion on different reasons or on a different view of the case. Then you have the plurality opinion. An opinion that is written and shared by more than one judge and which agrees with the majority decision but based upon different additional reasoning. And 5, dissenting opinion. A separate opinion in which a judge disagrees with the conclusion reached by the majority of the court and explains his or her views on the case. The selection of federal judges is done through judicial appointments, in where the President of the United States makes the decision to appoint, but with the advice and consent of Congress. Basically, starts in the executive branch, then goes through the legislative branch, especially the Senate. A Supreme Court justice does not have term to serve, but instead they serve for life, or until they decide to retire or be impeached. As for the Supreme Court, as the Supreme Court does for policymaking, looks at the views of strict construction or broad construction of the law. Strict construction is looking to the letter of the law. Broad construction is looking to the context and purpose of the law when making its interpretation. For example, how the law was made in the 1800s and how would that same law be interpreted in 2020. When courts are being checked by the checks and balancing system, the executive check is done through judicial implementation, and then legislative checks, which are done by constitutional amendments and rewriting the law. The other check is public opinion, in which is a ruling that influences both the executive and the legislative branches by acting together, in which turns effects by the judicial branch. Chapter 6. I'm not going to go too in depth with this chapter, but I did read the chapter. Public opinion has a lot to do with how politics is based on the United States. Public opinion can show us how every political decision is just really based on what the people think. By taking polls and surveys, everybody has a public view on certain things. Public opinion basically means, as quote from Crash Course, how a nation's population collectively views policy issues and evaluates political leaders. Since we are a democratic nation, public opinion is for the people. Chapter 8. Political parties. America has to be defined political parties. The Republicans, two defined political parties. The Republicans and the Democrats. When the Constitution was first written, there were two parties that is either agreed or disagreed with the Constitution: Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Federalists were for strong central government, and Anti-Federalists who opposed the Constitution and wanted most of the powers to still reside within the states. They would only join the Union after the Bill of Rights was added into the Constitution. The later American history, it would be Democrats versus the Whigs, and then now Democrats versus Republicans. Although America has two-party system where the Republicans and the Democrats hold political office, there are still two other parties, but not so popular. I believe it is to be the far right and the far left parties, the Green Party and the Libertarian Party. Chapter 9. Campaigns and elections. Campaigns are expensive. Are an expensive process in which the cost can be in the millions, if not billions, of dollars to run. First, you start off with a presidential primary, which means it is a statewide primary election of delegates to a political national convention. It is held to find out who would be the party's presidential nominee. We recently just had one this year. The Democrats were running to choose who would be the party leader to be chosen for president. When managing the campaign, certain steps take place. The primary election takes place to choose the candidates for the general election, which is an election open to all voters that determines the various elected positions, usually done in November. When financing a campaign, you, the person running, must collect money from different organizations to stay afloat. That is where PACs comes in, which is PACs comes in. It is a committee to set up representing a corporation, labor union, and interest groups. They are the ones that raise and give campaign donations. The Hatch Act was established to restrict political activities for government employees. It limited contributions for up to $5,000 and prohibited political groups from spending more than $3 million in any campaign. And the FEC in charge to make sure that they are following the regulation. But there is always a loophole in the system. When the PAC finance the campaign, it's called hard money. But when soft money is involved, it's campaign contributions which are not regulated by the federal state law. It is usually given to parties to fund general party activities. Hence why you can see campaign funds be seen in the billions. When electing for president, you have an elector who is a member of the college who selects the president and vice president. Each state's electors are chosen in each presidential election year, according to the state laws. Many citizens have problems with the electoral voting system, and other problems also occur, like how the older population tend to vote more than the younger population because they're more set in their ways and they consider it as a regular activity for them. Um, as well as if you are more educated, you tend to vote more than an educated individual. Race in turn has issues. The African American and Latin families are less likely to vote than the white Americans. But do not blame the voting system or the winner if you did not vote. And then chapter 10, the media. The media plays a big role in politics. It usually influences us in what way we should do in the political world. Most people, when watching and making decisions based on politics, are from the media source, the news. The media entertains the public, reports the news, they identify public problems, they help establish socialization on the new generation. They provide political forum and making profits by advertising to support the private news network. There are many different sources of news that you can rely on. The number one source in the United States is use of the television. Me personally, I use the web. Other forms are the newspaper and talk radio. Every news source forms a bias. Most biases tend to favor the liberal way. That is it for the chapters. I made the other chapters shorter because I still have the other essay to do. But anyway, thank you. Have a good day. And hopefully I'll see you in Georgia State next semester, but not as a student of yours. Have a good day. You are actually a very good professor. I like you. I wish I had a professor like you the last time. Stay blessed.